Hello everyone and welcome back to our course. In the last lecture we began our study of Plato's Republic, where we focused on Glaucon's challenge to Socrates in Book 2. Glaucon asked Socrates there to defend the idea that living justly is intrinsically good for us. To answer this, Plato introduces a tripartite model of human psychology in Book 4. He argues that the human soul consists of three main parts: reason, spirit, and appetite. For Plato, justice is the harmonious interaction among these three parts of the soul. In this lecture, we're going to discuss some problems with Plato's conception of the good life in the Republic. We'll examine how his understanding of justice as happiness seems incomplete in Book 4 by considering the role that reason plays within the soul and what it is that Plato believes reason does. This will lead us naturally to a discussion of the difference between knowledge or wisdom and mere belief or opinion, and why, for Plato, the role of the rational part of the soul in living well crucially involves the pursuit of knowledge. Alright, so before we dig in, let's take a moment to recap where we are in the Republic. A key focus for Plato throughout this dialogue is the question, what does happiness, or eudaimonia, consist in? As we noted last time, eudaimonia in Greek has a much broader meaning than our popular notion of happiness. Eudaimonia is best understood as a form of living well or flourishing as a human being. So the core topic of the Republic is, how should a person live? And more specifically, what's the role of justice in living well? Glaucon, who we meet in Book 2, argues that justice is unnatural for human beings. According to him, humans are essentially self-interested by nature. If Glaucon is correct, then happiness requires living unjustly, or at least as unjustly as one can manage without getting caught. Plato, however, using Socrates as his spokesperson, completely disagrees. According to Socrates and Plato, happiness requires living justly. Glaucon and his brother Adeimantus challenge Socrates on this point in Book 2. They ask Socrates to prove that justice is intrinsically beneficial, that it's worth pursuing for its own sake, apart from the social rewards it brings. To meet this challenge, Plato argues in Book 4 that a life of justice is necessary for human happiness, but only when justice is understood in a specific way. The central, all-important idea here for Plato is that justice should be understood as an internal, harmonious state within the human soul or psyche. As we saw last week, Plato divides up the human soul into three separate parts: reason, the wisdom-loving part; spirit, the honor-loving part; and appetite, the pleasure-loving part. Plato then goes on to argue that happiness, or eudaimonia, requires a condition of psychological health. This psychological health, in turn, is achieved by living justly, where living justly requires a balanced, harmonious state between the three parts of the soul. This allows Plato, by the end of Book 4, to conclude that happiness requires living justly, because happiness is tied to psychological health, and psychological health is achieved through a life of justice. This is Plato's basic argument in the Republic for the idea that justice is an intrinsic and not just an instrumental good. Let's consider a direct quote from the end of Book 4 of the Republic, which encapsulates Plato's understanding of the role of justice in a well-lived life. And in truth, justice is, it seems, something of this sort. However, it isn't concerned with someone's doing his own externally, but with what is inside him, with what is truly himself and his own. One who is just does not allow any part of himself to do the work of another part, or allow the various classes within him to meddle with each other. He regulates well what is really his own, and rules himself. He puts himself in order, is his own friend, and harmonizes the three parts of himself like three limiting notes in a musical scale: high, low, and middle. He binds together those parts, and any others there may be in between, and from having been many things, he becomes entirely one, moderate, and harmonious. Only then does he act. And when he does anything, whether acquiring wealth, taking care of his body, engaging in politics, or in private contracts, in all of these, he believes that the action is just and fine, that preserves this inner harmony and helps achieve it, and calls it so. and regards as wisdom the knowledge that oversees such actions. And he believes that the action that destroys this harmony is unjust and calls it so, and regards the belief that oversees it as ignorance. This passage illuminates Plato's holistic vision of justice, not as an external set of actions, but as an internal state of harmony within the individual. It emphasizes the self-regulatory aspect of justice. A just individual is someone who, quote, puts himself in order, harmonizing the disparate parts of the human soul, reason, spirit, and appetite, much like notes in a musical scale. On this view, justice isn't simply a matter of following laws or social norms, it's about achieving a state of psychological well-being. When a person is just in this deep sense, every action, whether it's personal or political action, becomes an extension of this internal harmony. Such a life, according to Plato, is not only just, but also deeply fulfilling, or happy in the eudaimonic sense of happiness. But now let's address some problems for this theory of the good life in the Republic. Plato's view of justice is deeply psychological. It's about having a harmonious soul where reason, spirit, and appetite work together in concert. A key question arises: what does this inner harmony have to do with acting justly? Will a soul that's internally balanced always act in a way that's externally just? Put simply, can we be sure that a person with a just soul, in Plato's sense, will also behave justly towards others? For Plato, the answer's yes. He believes there's a direct identity between the internally just person and the person who does what's just. But why? To understand this theory better, we need to dig deeper into Plato's ideas as they unfold in later parts of the Republic. We'll focus particularly here on the role that reason plays in Plato's conception of the soul, because for Plato, it's reason that holds the key to why a harmoniously ordered soul will naturally result in a person acting justly. So, what does reason do in the soul exactly? We've said that the function of reason is to rule in accordance with wisdom, or knowledge. But what does this involve? If you recall that long quote a minute ago at the end of Book 4, you may have noted a distinction that Plato draws between knowledge and belief or opinion. What's the difference? Well, the key is that you can believe falsely, but you cannot know falsely. Most of the time, what most of us have is not knowledge, but beliefs or opinions. However, while knowledge is very hard to achieve, Plato still thinks it's worth pursuing. To get a handle on this idea, suppose that this morning I claim to know that I had sweet potato for dinner yesterday. And suppose later in the afternoon I find out that I did not in fact have sweet potato, but yams. What will I say about my morning self in the afternoon? That I used to know I had sweet potato yesterday, but now I know I didn't? No, this doesn't really make much sense. Instead, I'll say something like, I thought I knew I had sweet potatoes yesterday, but I didn't actually know that. If we become convinced that something we claim to know is false, we retract that claim. We can put this in the form of a principle. Knowledge implies truth. Belief claims are very different. Here I can say, I used to believe I had sweet potatoes for dinner yesterday, but now I believe I didn't. It's quite possible to believe something that's false, and this is because belief is indifferent to truth. So again, the basic thought here is that you can believe falsely, but you cannot know falsely. Knowledge implies truth, whereas beliefs can be true or false. If I claim to know something, but find out that I'm wrong, I retract the knowledge claim. And if you recall here our intro unit and the apology, you can think of what Socrates did historically in this way, when he used his method of cross-examination, the elenchus. He wanted to get his interlocutors to reassess and be more careful about their knowledge claims. Now, perhaps you won't quarrel with this distinction between knowledge and belief. Still, you might object that the distinction cannot be meaningfully applied, because all we ever have are beliefs or opinions. You might think that knowledge isn't possible for human beings. Perhaps we can understand what it would be like to have knowledge, but it doesn't follow that we ever have any. So, where's the evidence that we actually possess knowledge? The clearest examples here for Plato are the truths of mathematics. These truths can be seen as correct through demonstration because an account or reason why can be given. And once you understand the reason for a true belief, you have knowledge. So if you have a belief that's true and will endure and is supported by good reasons, it's knowledge. To see the difference here, consider how it is you know that 3 times 3 is 9. Imagine for a moment that the only reason you believe 3 times 3 is 9 is that it's been drilled into you since childhood, by your parents, your teachers, or maybe even a catchy YouTube video. In this case, you're relying only on authority or repetition to support your belief. All you have is a belief. Now let's run a little thought experiment. What if your teachers had been pranksters and told you since childhood that 3 times 3 is 12? You'd likely go through elementary school thinking you knew a piece of basic arithmetic, only to be crushed during your first math trivia night in middle school. The point here is that beliefs that are based only on authority are fragile and, quite frankly, risky. But now let's say you're shown this graphic, 3 dots arranged in a sequence, multiplied 3 times. What you're seeing here is not just a repetition of a fact, but a demonstration, a reason why 3 times 3, or 3 times, must always equal 9. Each row contains 3 dots, and there are 3 rows. When you count them, it amounts to 9 dots. Through this visual, you have the reason why 3 times 3 is 9, elevating your belief into knowledge. Knowledge, as Plato would argue, is a personal achievement. You're not just inheriting a belief, you are understanding it for yourself. You now know the answer, not because someone told you, but because you've grasped the reason behind it. This is what Plato means when he says that reason in the soul, the rational part of the soul, seeks knowledge. Not just a collection of beliefs heard from others, but a grounded, personal understanding of the world. So we can now see the basic distinction between knowledge and belief for Plato. Knowledge has a certain kind of endurance. Once you know something in the way that Plato describes, it sticks with you. Knowledge is also always true. You cannot know something that's false. And crucially, knowledge is always supported by reasons, by an understanding of why something is the case. Beliefs or opinions, on the other hand, can be changeable. What we believe today, we may not believe tomorrow. These beliefs can be true or false, and importantly, they're not usually supported by reasons. Sometimes they are, but often they're not. So the next time you claim to know something, take a moment to ask yourself, is this really a piece of knowledge I have, or just a strongly held belief? Plato would ask you to seek the former, to strive for a reasoned understanding that turns mere belief into genuine knowledge. And with that, we can wrap up this part of Lecture 4. Let's quickly revisit the main points. We've delved deeper into the Republic, building on our last lecture on the intrinsic value of a just life and Plato's understanding of justice as a kind of psychological health. We've also explored the role of reason in Plato's tripartite model of the soul and what it is that reason does. We then turned to the subtle but crucial distinction between knowledge and belief, and we saw how genuine knowledge, for Plato, is a special state supported by reasons. Knowledge is therefore enduring and a personal achievement. In contrast, beliefs can be true or false, and are often not supported by reasons. In the next part of this lecture, we'll take this topic a step further by exploring what it is we can have knowledge of, according to Plato, and how it is that we develop knowledge. See you soon.